Well, I'm going to jump into things this morning. We have been in this sermon series that we've been in over the last few weeks entitled The Building Blocks of Community. And we've been looking at just different characteristics that are really essential, not just, they're actually essential characteristics for us to function in healthy relationships with others, with our family members, with coworkers, with people around us, and then obviously with our family and those that we live with as well. But then also how we function and operate as a church. And so we want to personally function in these healthy relationships because God has designed us to operate in a healthy way with others. Unfortunately, a lot of our relationships get convoluted by dysfunction, and there's lots of challenges that are experienced. I know I was talking to one of my kids yesterday that's dealing with some one of my kids is actually away at school. I'll let you figure out who that is, but just some of the challenges that he's having in some roommate situations, and just looking for some guidance just in terms of how do I approach this particular situation. And so relationships are challenging, and we don't always see eye to eye, right? There's a tension that we develop, and sometimes we can kind of alienate each other. We can ignore each other, and yet God has created us to function in these healthy relationships, and He wants us to be able to experience that for ourselves personally, and He wants others to be benefited and blessed as a result of that as well. So there's several building blocks that are essential to building this healthy community. And over the last few weeks, we've looked at 2 building blocks. We're actually into our 5th week of this series, but we've only looked at 2 building blocks. I guess that's kind of how I roll. It takes me a while to get through them. But the first building block, we spent a couple of weeks looking at the building block of love, looking at God's agape love, that unconditional sacrificial love, and how that should be foundational to all of our relationships. And that's what should set apart Christians from others in the world. Because at the core, we want to be people that are loving as God loved us, right? And that's different. That's a different type of love than the world currently exhibits today. Mostly in the world today, it's we love those who love us in return, or even that is hard, right? Maybe our love is somewhat selfish or is emotionally driven or whatever. And yet God has called us to model and to practice this unconditional sacrificial love that He wants to develop in us. The Creator of the universe wants to develop within us, give us, in order to be able to give to others around us as well. And then last week we talked about the fact that we all have a role to play. So we talked about the building block of roles, how incredibly valuable we all are to God in our families, in our work environments, in our church environment, all the different environments where relationships exist. We all have unique roles. We function differently. We're not all the same. And we can thank God for that, right? We can thank God for that. And so the fact that there are differences between us, and a lot of times, I look at Cheryl and I, we I think work pretty well together in our relationship because we both bring complementary things that are necessary for the relationship to work. And that's in many ways why God says, bring the 2 together to become one. There's a sense of we're better together because we compensate for where the others are not as good, right? And so, or where they have strengths here but have weaknesses here, whereas the other one has those strengths and the other set maybe has the strengths in the weakness areas, and conversely as well. So we talked about how important each of the roles are that we carry, okay? This morning and next week, so I already know that for the next 2 weeks, we're going to spend 2 weeks on this next one. And this is a really important building block of community. And that is the power of our words. The power of our words. And I think this will be hopefully a very practical message for you this morning, this week and next week, and how our words can both be used for incredible good in the lives of others, but can also be a means of really devastating destruction. And we're going to focus a little bit on that second one first today, okay, in terms of the reality of how destructive our words can be. So you've heard this, the phrase, there's a picture up here. It's maybe a little hard to see that, but, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. You've heard that, right? That's really not true, is it? No, it's not. It's more like, look at this next one that'll pop up here. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can hurt forever. And that's really true, isn't it? I'm sorry if that's a little hard to read. It was bigger on the screen in the other room, and I had to resize it for in here. But really, that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is really a ridiculous statement. And in many ways, it's obviously, as we said, it's false. How many of us here have experienced the destructive nature of somebody else's words towards you? Raise your hand. Okay, pretty much all of us, right? We've all experienced the destructive force of words that were spoken to us. Now, if we're honest, how many of us have been on the giving end of destructive words towards others? Yes? Right? We all have, right? We've both given it and we've received. Well, we've received it and we've given it as well. So last I checked, other than Jesus, there are no perfect human beings. And so we do make mistakes. We do struggle. We do experience challenges both in what we receive from other people and in many ways, despite that we're not really proud of, the ways in which we have actually been on the destructive giving end of words as well. We don't even need to personally attack with destructive words, but we can also do it with our body language and in the ways in which we communicate, maybe through, even just kind of nonverbal communication, an eye roll, a shrug, So I'm not really good at eye roll, but I can communicate a lot of what my words are by when you look at my face. And sometimes it's like, I watch my kids kind of look at me and it's like, I can see something's going on inside Dad, because the way his face is looking right now, he's wrestling with something. And so my face has a way of communicating a lot of some of my inner tension and struggle. And so we can communicate with people, not just by what we say, but how we approach or how we presence ourselves among people as well. Now I remember, this is a bad dad moment, and I'm proud to share it in terms of it being authentic, but I'm not proud of the moment, okay? I remember a while back, I was coaching a Little League baseball game when both Justin and Zach were in elementary school. And I remember when I was first base coach, and I'm standing there, and we're at an important part of the game. I think there's a couple of guys on base. We're approaching the end of the game. We needed to secure 3 outs to win the game. And my son Zachary was playing first base. He was right next to me. And somebody hit a ball to Zach. It was a playable ball that should have been able to be fielded. And for some reason, he made an error. And that ball got past him, got through his legs. He didn't get his glove down or whatever. And it went through. And I came unglued. It was not a proud moment for me as a dad, as a coach, as a parent. And I was taking this game way too seriously, like most Little League parents do, unfortunately. And I remember just like yelling at Zachary, why can't you make the play? It wasn't that hard to make, It's like I was so intense, and I looked at Zach, and of course I'm embarrassing myself in front of the parents and the other coaches and the other players. I had to do a lot of follow-up work because of what I said and the way in which I carried myself on the field. But I remember looking at my son Zachary after I had publicly demeaned him or reprimanded him on the field. And he looked at me with these eyes, and I could see the tears start to well up. Oh, makes me a little bit teary now thinking about it. That I had just essentially embarrassed and destroyed him as his father in front of all of these other people. And after that half inning, Zach came into the dugout and he said, "Dad, I'm never going to play baseball again." And he did, and he continued to play. There's a picture here, after I took him out to get him a banana split at Baskin-Robbins. So he was really happy about that. But I owned up to Zach. I said, "Zach, I was wrong, and I apologize. That was not right of me. That was, and And he was forgiving of me, and the banana split really helped as well. But the reality is that as I was preparing for this message, I didn't reach out to Zach, but a couple of times. Zach is 20. How old is he now? 21? 22. 22 years old, right? And this was back when he was, 11, maybe 11 years old. And so 11 years ago. And I still remember that moment. And I still feel compelled on occasion to reach out to him. And I say, Zach, remember when I yelled at you? I really, really deeply regret that. I'm really sorry. That was wrong of me. And to which he says, whatever, Dad, it's okay. But I know that those words stick with us, right? When I asked you to raise your hand when somebody said something to you that was demeaning, you probably right away can pick out a couple. You remember, and it may have been 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 35 years ago. You can still remember those times. And so in some ways we can encourage as much as possible, but those memories can stay with us, right? The words and the impact of those words. So over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be breaking this message up, like I said, into two different parts. We're going to talk about the destructive nature of our words and the healing nature of our words. So this morning, I want to look at the destructive nature of our words, and I want us to look at, because James talks about this really well in James chapter 3. And so if you have a Bible and you want to look at James, I think there's actually Bibles in the seat pockets in front of you as well. So if you want to open to James chapter 3, you can do that. There is going to be a scripture up on the screens. If you want to just look up here as well, that's fine as well. But James chapter 3, starting at verse 3. Now look at what James says here. He says, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Remember when none of us were alive when the Titanic sunk, right? But we hear the stories, right? And we know if we watch the movie Titanic or watch documentaries, we know that thing hit an iceberg. And that rudder was not able, the speed of the ship, and when they saw the iceberg, that rudder was not able to be turned as quickly, as in advance enough in order to avoid that iceberg. And so that huge, beautiful ship, right, is steered and directed by this very small thing under the surface that you hardly see or hardly know. And it has a tremendous impact on the success, in that case, the demise of that ship. But James uses these analogies, the bits and horses and a ship that is steered by this small rudder, to really, he's beginning to lay a foundation to help us understand how incredibly important and how powerful our words can be. And he uses these two analogies, which are not as common to us in our day and age, right? Last I checked here, there's nobody that has horses in their backyard. Although if we lived over in the Central Valley, that would be more prevalent. But this idea of bits and horses and riding a horse and how you control a horse by what's in their mouth and how you use the reins, that would have been a very common illustration in the time that James is writing, as well as with boats as well. So he's going to want us to see that our words have tremendous power. They have tremendous power over individuals, those that are on the receiving end of our words. Now look at what he continues to say. He says, likewise, here he's drawing the connection between the bits in the mouths of horses and the rudder on a ship. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell itself. Right? Wow, those are pretty strong words that James uses to talk about. He's not just talking about the physical tongue. He's talking about what we say, how we communicate, the words that come from our mouths. And he uses this analogy by talking about how a spark is able to start such a great forest fire. right? And we see evidence of that, right? Of just ways in which forest fires get started by sometimes somebody just throwing a cigarette butt out the window, and it just sets everything on fire. And if you make, go camping and make fires, or, we will occasionally up at Cheryl's parents' cabin, we'll have burn days where you have to clean in the mountains. You have to have a defensible space around the cabin. And so you take all that rubbish, take it to a burn spot. And it's amazing to me if it's, as long as it's not damp and wet from snow, that stuff is so dry up there. You just take a little lighter or a match and light one leaf, and within a few, seconds, like that whole thing is going up in flames. And so James uses that analogy in this particular description of the importance of our words. I heard about a fire in a building in London a while ago, and they said the fire was started by a bird picking up a small burning cigarette butt and taking it back to its nest. And that's what caused, right, this destructive fire. To just use that illustrate the reality of how explosive a small little spark, a small ember, and the destructive nature that it can have. And so our words carry the same potential for disaster in the lives of other people. That's what James wants us to see. But he goes on and he actually uses some very negative words. He says, our tongue, our words, are a fire. They are a world of evil. They come completely corrupt. They set your life on fire. They're fueled by hell itself. To which I'd say, James, okay, tone it down a little bit, James. I mean, come on. But he's making a great point. Great teachers make great points. And he wants us to understand the weight, the heavy weight of the power of our words and how incredibly destructive they can be. We're going to see later that there's hope, the positive force of our words, right? We're going to talk about that next week. But this week, James is helping us have a reality check and realize that our tongues, our words, we have a problem. And I think we would probably all in this room agree that we have a problem. Because we don't get it right all the time. And a lot of times we say things that cause problems, and destructive words can come from our mouths. He goes on and he says, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Man, he is really hammering it, right? He's not letting up. Everything else has been figured out, but no man or woman can figure that thing out, that tongue and those words and what comes out of our mouths. He says it's a restless evil. He says that it's full of deadly poison. And I think these last two words are especially significant. That the tongue, or our words, are full of deadly poison. When confronted with something poisonous, what is our instinctive reaction? Go the other way, right? And a lot of times if we've built up an experience in our lives where we have poisoned others by our words, they are repelled by us, right? You're an unsafe person. I can't trust what you're going to say. You need to walk away. And I once took a missions trip, it's been a while ago, to Belize. You can see a picture up here. And Belize is the home of the Fer-de-Lance snake, which is one of the most venomous snakes in the world. And because of that, there are lots of elevated walkways in Belize, because there's lots of brush, and the place that we went to was not like, when you think of Belize, you probably think of a great vacation spot, because it is a beautiful country right up on the water. But as you go, it's a very impoverished nation as you go inland into the jungle areas. And we were actually in an area, in a jungle area there, and everything had elevated pathways. Cabins were kind of up on stilts. There were elevated platforms. You were instructed at night to make sure you had a flashlight with you everywhere you go, because of the threat of snakes, of these Fer-de-Lance snakes that are incredibly deadly. And so there was this sense of, you need to be really cautious about your own safety as it comes to walking around in the night. And so we have this, James uses this analogy of how poisonous, how deadly our words can be, similar to like the deadly bite of a snake. We may actually never kill somebody physically with our words. I mean, I guess you would if you made the command. In military, sometimes you make the command to go do something. You're a military commander will say, okay, go ahead and strike. And then those words lead to maybe the death of people in a military or war environment. But the last I checked, we never actually physically killed somebody by what we said. We don't have that. We're not like some sort of superhero where like fire comes out of our mouth, right? And vaporizes people. But the idea is that we really can kill by what we say, right? We can destroy. We can cause tremendous problems for other people by how we communicate. So we need to have the same sense of urgency and awareness in terms of our words and the impact that they can have on our lives and on the lives of others. And so do we consider our words with the same potential and danger as a venomous snake? So you look at that fertile snake and realize is it helpful to look at a snake and say, wow, that's a pretty dangerous thing? What I say, James says, is very similar to that. Like that's a powerful image, a powerful thing to understand. Do you know that our words are also very closely tied to bank accounts? You're like, what? How so? Well, I'm glad you asked. How so? So banks are holders and keepers of our money. And for many of us, it takes a long time to save up money in our accounts by making deposits over time. And especially if you're trying to save money, you put a little bit in here and there, and eventually you maybe increase a savings account, let's say up to $5,000, and you've been saving money for something for a long period of time. But isn't it amazing how quickly we can withdraw all that money and it's gone? I remember we had to buy a new washer and dryer like last week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like in one click on the computer, like spent. My Apple card pops up and it says, your card is processed, for the amount of these. And they're like, man, just like that, money is gone. It's spent. It's so instantaneous. And yet it takes so long to build up the savings to pay for some of those things. And the same is really true in our work with our words and our relationships. We may spend years. Here's the connection. You're wondering, where's he going? We may spend years making good, encouraging word deposits into the lives of other people. And we make a massive withdrawal with one statement, one destructive word, right? That's the force, right? Sometimes I'll tell that to kids or other people that I talk with, or, it's like paying attention to the fact that, at some point, sometimes with people where you're dealing with challenging situations, and if they're taking maybe advantage of you or they're causing issues in terms of like the way that they're communicating, a lot of times I'll say, you realize that you're making massive withdrawals on your bank account in terms of your relationship. You continue to go this way and do what you're doing and say what you're saying in the spirit in which you're saying it, you're essentially depleting your bank account of relational integrity with individuals. And there's a lot of truth to that. And so, again, we could take years of making those deposits, yet one or two words making a massive withdrawal on a lifetime investment. And I think this is really true. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not forgiveness. There should be forgiveness. And there should be grace because we make mistakes. But just think about it. I asked you earlier, do you remember a time when somebody said something that was emotionally destructive to you by their words? And we all raised our hands. Okay? You probably don't remember as often all of the encouragement. It's there, but but the destructive nature, the impact that it has, somehow has a much deeper impact in terms of our feel of it and how we receive it, and that withdrawal that was taken from our bank account. It's very, very difficult and very challenging. And so we need to be very careful about what we say and how we say it. I was just telling Cheryl yesterday, she was commenting to me in the car and complimenting me about something, and I made an emphasis to thank her for that. That was because it was very meaningful to have a word of encouragement given, right? In terms of the building something up, and as opposed to, not that she doesn't tear me down, that's not her nature at all, but so she makes lots of good deposits, right? I don't think there's been many withdrawals, but that idea of like the understanding the withdrawal potential and the need to be making positive deposits into those relational bank accounts. We'll talk more about that piece next week in terms of how to make those positive deposits. You've heard the old adage, if you can't say something nice, don't say it at all. Well, there's a lot of truth in that, right? And so as we look at our own lives, we need to consider our relationships and our words from this perspective. And so I want to share some words of wisdom with us, kind of as an application as we close this time in just a few minutes. And I say words of wisdom because not that I am all wise in these words, just that these are some things that I've noticed throughout the course of my life. And I'm sure that some of this will resonate with you as well in terms of the application. So the first word of wisdom is to know your audience. Know your audience. And what do I mean by this? We all give and receive communication in different ways. Be sensitive towards others. Like I already know, and I'm using Cheryl as an example a lot here, but I know that Cheryl, by nature, sometimes I like to communicate with sarcasm. Well, I know Cheryl sarcasm is not her thing. And so I know, as her husband, that it is not wise for me to communicate with Cheryl with sarcasm because she doesn't receive that well, right? And that's not in her communication language way of operation. And so I pay attention. I try to do my best to pay attention to it. I know my audience. When I'm talking with Cheryl, I want to think about how she's going to receive something. So I want to be careful that I'm not causing barriers to that. Whereas with others, there are others that I know in my life that I can, like sarcasm, and that is actually an endearing way of communication. It's like a connectivity. It's like a relational connection, and there's fun in it. But it varies based on the person. So the point is that we need to know our audience, right? And that's what I mean by that. Recognizing that the more that we get to know each other, the more we know kind of how we relationally connect with each other. And we do this a lot of times instinctively as human beings. We get to know people and then we start to experiment, even though we may not even know we're doing it. But we try to experiment with how does this person tick and how do I tick with them in terms of how I communicate. And so knowing your audience is really important because the focus is I'm concerned about how are you going to receive what I'm saying. The last thing I want to do is be a barrier to that, right? So some of the biggest challenges for kids that are becoming teenagers and college students and all that stuff is they're still developing or having this awareness of how to effectively communicate with other people because they don't have the life experience in many ways to know, wow, not everybody sees things the way I do or communicates the way that I do, right? So the idea of knowing your audience is really important and paying attention to that. And it also shows our desire to serve one another, right? That's what Jesus calls us to do, is to serve one another. A second word of wisdom is to walk away and say nothing at all. Now let me explain this. If you have the habit of flying off the handle with your words when you're angry, it's better to walk away and not say anything at all and then come back. We don't just avoid stuff. Like that's really important. Like some of us do a really good job of just sweeping it under the rug and walking away and then we bury it, right? Or it's still there. There's been a conflict and we don't ever come back and talk about it. No, that's not healthy, right? It's healthy to talk about these things. But if you have a habit of getting really fired up or upset about something and then you can say things that can be destructive, you know that about yourself, then give yourself permission to say, you know what, I'm just going to exit the room for a while now and go for a walk. Because I need to cool off because I might say something that's destructive to that other person and I don't want to do that. I know it's not right. I need to cool off and come back and engage this more objectively. So So walk away, say nothing at all, but then re-engage, right? At a point that is right, and there can be a healthy conversation about whatever is being, whatever the discussion may be. Okay? Another word of wisdom, count to 10 before responding. There's a lot of truth in this. It kind of goes with what I just said before, right? Sometimes in your relationship, it's like, okay, give each other permission to say, you know what, I'm gonna count to 10 before I say anything, because a lot of times those highly intense emotional reactions will dissipate within about 10 seconds. And then you can be much more objective in your response. Most of the explosive danger can happen in the first 10 seconds after you're responding to something, right? So this is hopefully very practical. And so I'm not telling you that I have this figured out, have this perfected, by no means, but I know, at least I know some of the right things to be putting in place. Okay? Always seek to listen first and not respond. That's really important. Seek to listen and to not respond, right? That's really paying attention. And that's hard for some of us. Because a lot of us probably, we form opinions really quickly based on what we're reading and listening to, or when someone's saying, especially if they're coming from a vantage point of a constructive criticism, whether it's bad criticism or constructive criticism, or being honest. We can get very defensive because we feel our identity is being attacked. And so we can seek to try to justify or to try to protect ourselves, like our own identity, by saying something and trying to fight whatever's coming at us. And so it's really important and an act, really a sign of maturity for us to learn to seek to listen first, to really truly understand. A lot of times I've shared in the past that I've done marriage, premarital counseling and marital counseling. And I always think it's funny because, I'm not a professional therapist. I'm a pastor who's been trained in some ways to help with relational stuff. And it's amazing to me when I sit down and I'll talk with a couple. And the main barrier, the main problem why there's problems in the relationship is mostly because there's just a lack of ability to how to communicate with each other. Because one person says something and the other person doesn't listen, and they have their own thing. And there's not this mutual kind of like respect to really listen. And so we do this active listening exercise, which you've probably heard of before. It sounds kind of rote and routine in a lot of ways, but it's really helpful to kind of repeat back what you think the other person's saying. So somebody will say to you, Darren, I really don't like it when you run over me with your words when I'm still talking, and you start talking to me about other things, and I don't feel like you're listening to me. And then to which I would respond and I would say, well, what you're saying is you don't care about my opinion. Right? That's an example. It's like, no, that's not what I said. Like your opinion's valid, Darren, but the point is, and you did it just again, by the way, you're not really listening to what I'm trying to communicate. And so then there's this back and forth that goes on. Now say that again. What are you really trying to communicate? And then for me to come alongside and say, oh, so what you mean is this. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Oh, thank you. That makes sense. I understand. You see what I mean? So sometimes that learning to give the tools, and I do this with couples when I counsel them, is giving them the tools to be able to communicate better, to listen and to receive what each other's saying, and not try to respond to it right away, but to articulate back what you think you're hearing, and to get confirmation if that's really what they're saying. And then we have a good place to start from. So anyway, seeking to listen first instead of responding. And then the last one is when, not if, you mess up, apologize. Right? When, not if. So you notice I didn't put if there. Because yes, we will mess up. We are going to make mistakes. When we make mistakes, apologize. I mean, it's amazing to me how often we just won't say, you know what, I'm sorry for that. I blew it. We're just sometimes so afraid to own up to our mistake. We rationalize it away or blame somebody else. It's amazing what a genuine apology will do for someone who has been hurt by your words. I think about my son Zach. The only thing I can do with my son Zach is I can go back to him and tell him. I can keep myself from doing that again as best that I can, right? But it's to come back and to say, I am deeply sorry and regretful for what I said to you. It was wrong of me, and I deeply apologize. And I love you And I'm very, very sorry that I did that. And I said that because I know it's harmful and destructive. Like, think about it. If you, receiving those words, like when words are given from a place of humility and a sense of like recognizing our own brokenness and our own owning up to our own problem, it's amazing how people generally can be very receptive and very forgiving in those places of authenticity. And so don't ever underestimate when you make a mistake. Come clean. Apologize. And don't seek to try to say, the reason why I did that is because you said this. Let them deal with their... There's two parties to every conflict, right? So let other people deal with they have to take ownership for their part in it. But you have an opportunity to take ownership. We have an opportunity to take ownership for our contribution to the problem and to apologize for what we've done. This models, again, the realities of the life that Jesus showed us. And also beware, like I talked about before, another point that I didn't put on here, but I added this morning when I was reviewing, is beware of our body language, right? Beware of how your body is communicating to the person that you're talking to. And so a lot of times I have to make a conscious effort to kind of lighten my face a little bit, because when I get like intense and into myself, my face it's kind of like this natural, like gravity pulls my lips down, and I look like, man, he looks so angry. You know, it's like, I'm really just kind of thinking through and trying to process things. But sometimes I am angry and it looks like that. But the problem is, it's trying to pay attention to how you're presenting yourself with another person. Are you approachable, right? So these are some like communication skills 101 type stuff too. But again, God's created us as human beings to interact with each other in ways that are healthy to each other. Okay? Let me share one more bonus idea as we wrap up this morning. We've talked about the destructive nature of our words and how they can impact others, but I want us to consider how our own words impact our own soul and our own posture, what's going on inside of us. Look at these words by Jesus in Luke chapter 6. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. There's a lot of wisdom in that teaching, isn't it? What comes out of our mouths indicates what's really going on inside of us, what's in our hearts. And so let that be an encouragement and a litmus test in many of us. When we feel the nature, the desire to strike out or to lash out, to examine what's going on in the deeper levels of my own being that's leading me to this response. And likely it is an imbalance. Now, sometimes it's based on purely justice, like you're upset and frustrated and there's a justified reason. But there's ways to approach that in a way that are healthy. For example, I'll give you a quick example here. We stayed in Riverside on Wednesday night, downtown Riverside. And we stayed at a hotel down there that was under construction. In the morning, I got up before the rest of everybody. I went down and had some coffee, and I was doing some work downstairs in the lobby area. Well, the construction workers were there, and apparently they were working on the top 2 floors of the hotel. It was like a 5-story hotel, and so levels 4 and 5 are closed off. We were on level 3. Well, they come down for breakfast, and it's like they are literally like working in the room right above us, like scraping, ripping up they're doing a kind of a remodel of the whole place, right? And so there's this sense that, and then I was like, it's no big deal, we're leaving, whatever. But then I went up. Here, I go up and experience it. I'm trying to get ready to. I'm like, this isn't right. You pay money for a room, and I have that room until 11 o'clock in the morning, and I can't even think straight. It's so loud in my room. And so I knew in that moment that there was an act of there was a sense of justice there. Like, this isn't right that your customers are having to deal with this, right? They've paid money for this room, right? There's the justice aspect of it. But I also recognize that the lady working the front desk, it's not her fault. So the worst thing I could do is go down and attack her by what's going on. So I went downstairs to get ready to check out, and I looked at a name. She had her name on her thing, and I said hi, whatever her name was, and I just looked at her with a smile, and I just said, we have a problem. And she said, "Oh, what's the problem, Mr. Johnson?" And then I was able to communicate. I said, "This is really not right. What's going on with?" And I explained what was happening. And I made it clear as I was talking to her, I'm not blaming you. I know this is not your fault. But I want you to know the gravity of how we feel about that. This is not right, that we've paid for this room and we're dealing with this. We can't even get ready in there. It's so loud. And she was very sorrowful and very worked with me and was very but it was because I was able to approach her in a way that I didn't allow this justice or this inner frustration come across in a way that was destructive to her, right? There was, you know what I mean? That could easily happen. You could go down, and it happens all the time. People get blown away because they're frustrated about something, and they attack the other person personally, right? So there's this sense of paying attention to what's going on. Okay, I'm dealing with this inner turmoil. Okay, how do I communicate this in a way that is graceful and respectful and loving, and yet maybe still direct, right? And not to back down from whatever the problem may be. And so Jesus helps instruct us as we pay attention to what's going on inside of us. It may be a good indication of where our hearts are. So I share that example because it was the interplay of my own heart. I feel like my heart was in the right place. I was dealing with this tension of justice, but I was able to handle it properly, right? As opposed to and there are many times when my heart is not in the right place, and I could fly off the handle, and I could say things that would be maybe harmful or destructive to somebody else, and then that would obviously be wrong. That would not be, but the indication I would look at and say, man, it's out of the frustration of my own heart. My relationship with Jesus is not kind of where it needs to be. I need to spend more time in relationship with Him to get to a place of health, so that I can function well with those around us. Okay. And so the point, again, is that what's going on inside of us can be an indicator of how our relationship with God is functioning, right? So pay attention to that in this process as well. If you're feeling prone towards frustration and lashing out and destructiveness in terms of how you communicate with other people, it may be an indication that there are levels of our own soul that need to be tended to, right? That's the point. And so it's not just putting a Band-Aid on it and say, well, just don't say bad things or hurt people with your words, right? There is truth to that. But if we don't address the rootedness of the problem sometimes in the inner recesses of our being, which is a lack of health in our relationship with God, then we're merely putting Band-Aids on a problem. And so that's a constant, for me, it's a constant way that God will show me the condition of my own soul, is by how I respond to conflict and challenges around me. Can I handle it respectfully, or does my nature, my heart, my knee-jerk reaction, does it really help reveal for me, wow, there's a lack of stability in my relationship with God right now that needs to be tended to first than trying to get this other thing taken care of. Okay? So anyway, with that, I went a little bit longer than I planned to on that, but anyway, I want to encourage us to be thinking, obviously, about the power of our words and the force for destructiveness that can come from them. And then next week, as we talked about, we'll talk about the incredible healing power of our words, right? You could say the yin and yang of it, right? The opposite, the one, the other, right? Destructiveness, but also how incredibly powerful they can be in terms of how we communicate to others, because James will help us see that as well. Okay? All right. Jesus, thanks for this time together. Thank you for your words here in James. And we pray that you would continue to shape our words to be more in line with your heart and your words for us. And we thank you so much for your love for us and the love that you give us for one another. In Jesus' name, amen. All right.